Okay, we're in business. Okay, my name is Bill Thayer, and what I'm doing here with this short video is to try to demonstrate a couple things. First of all, I want to show who I am. I'm interested in doing enrichment lectures on cruise ships. I've been doing that on quite a few cruise ships now. And what I'm doing is preparing this video. Now, obviously you can't see what's on the screen here. So about halfway through this, we'll move the ladder forward and then we'll focus on the screen. So you get a little bit of me, and then you also get a little bit of seeing some of the charts that I use. My wife is the expert camera person, and around the house here we call her the grip. So when we move the ladder forward, because this is being stabilized by being put on a ladder, she's going to pan the room here. Where we are in the house is a room that I call the library. It's got some of the books. There's 3 rooms that have a lot of books. I have about 8,000 books. The reason for that is I'm really a technical guy by education. I got a BS in math from Stanford and a master's in aerospace from USC, and then an MBA. So most of my 30 years I put in the aerospace industry and aircraft and spacecraft, and then I put 10 years in real estate and finance. But my passion has always been history. That's why I've got 8,000 books, hard copy books, and about 2,000 in the cloud, because every chance I would get I would read history books. That's what I was really particularly interested in. And that's what I love to talk about, is history, exploration, technology, aviation, a variety of different subjects. So this particular talk is from a group of talks that I did on a cruise that was around the world. I didn't go all the way around the world. I was 18 days on a segment from Hong Kong to Dubai, and so we went to India. And since it was a around the world trip, I did talks on going around the world. So the very first person, and I realize you can't see this, was Magellan. And then I've got 10 talks listed here. I did Howard Hughes, Amelia Earhart, Wiley Post, who did it by aircraft, of course. And then I did some exploration talks, 3 of them on Captain Cook. I did Christopher Columbus. I did Portuguese developing the Spice Islands. So I will just go through these charts so that I know what I'm looking at. I realize you can't see that. And I will then, in the second half, sort of focus on some of the charts. So my outline for Magellan was, first of all, he was Portuguese. And he spent a lot of time serving the King Manuel of Portugal, fought for him in Africa, and served in his fleet that went around the world very soon after Vasco da Gama first went to India. The second thing that the Portuguese did is form a large armada under Almeida and send that to India to seize control of the spice trade, and they fought off all their competitors. Magellan was part of that, and as a part of that he went all the way to nearly Singapore. Then I talk about when Magellan was unsuccessful in convincing the King of Portugal to support his exploration going around the world to the west. Okay, now the Portuguese had gone around the world, at least to Singapore, to the east. He was proposing to reach the same destination by sailing west, going around what's now South America. And since he was unsuccessful, he said, okay, can I go over to the King of Spain and see if he's interested? The King of Portugal said, okay, but then later he changed his mind. He thought that wasn't such a good idea, and he was out to get Magellan. But I talk about Magellan serving now the King of Spain, and he set out with a fleet of 5 ships. And in the first year he didn't make it around the Straits of Magellan, but he made it very close down there. Then he went through the Straits of Magellan the next year, ended up sailing across the Pacific into the Philippines. He was actually doing pretty good. He got into a war with a neighboring island with the king that he was favorable or friendly with in the Philippines, and got himself killed, unfortunately. This, and it's a long story, it resulted in just 2 ships surviving. One of them tried to go back to Portugal one way around the world. The other one went around the tip of Africa the other way. That was a surviving ship. And when it was all done, 1 ship and 18 men out of the original 250 made it around the world. So that was kind of the outline. This is a picture of Magellan. a very, very tough, resolute, determined, brave in battle person, a very good mariner. This, again, is another chart that you can't see, but at the bottom of the chart it says, here's little Portugal up here, and they go all around Africa, they go to India, they go to the Spice Islands. And Portugal, of course, is a very small country, but that you see, for the Europeans, they opened up most of the world by ship. And it says, God gave Portugal a small land to live in, but a large world to die in. And that's kind of the essence of Portugal and the Portuguese spirit. These guys were not afraid to risk death or die. In fact, Magellan died over here. So Magellan, as I said, in the Portuguese service, he fought the Muslims in Morocco. He sailed with Almeida to India to open up the spice trade and monopolize the spice trade as much as they could for the Portuguese. And he went as far east as Malacca, which is near Portugal. So again, this chart doesn't show it, but here's Africa, here's the Spice Islands over here. In the Portuguese service, he went east, around Africa to India, over here to the Spice Islands. Now for the Spanish, what he was proposing, and here's South America over here, he was proposing to go down around the tip of South America, across the Pacific, and he thought it would be a very short distance, like 2 or 3 days of sailing, and he would end up over here in the Spice Islands. Didn't work out. So again, another chart, and this shows the Spice Islands being put just off the coast of Chile and Peru, and of course they weren't there at all. They were 7,000 miles away. On my talks, what I try to do is relate what I'm talking about to the cruise. So on this particular cruise, we had been here in Singapore, and we were sailing across to Cochin, which is in the southern part of India on the Malabar coast. And so I had 2 arrows pointing out where we were. This is where we were headed, was Cochin. I was talking out here in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And we would come to the Malabar coast, and this is where Magellan does. So where we were headed for was down here in the southern part in Cochin. And first Almeida came up here near Goa, and then came down the coast to Cochin. So when they sailed into the harbor, they knew that they weren't the first ones, that Magellan had been there a few years before them. Well, as I said, and I won't go into the details on this chart, there was bad blood between King Manuel and Magellan. Magellan left to go to Spain. He convinced the Spanish king to support his expedition to the west, and now we are going to move the camera forward. This is going to be an intricate maneuver, and until I give you the go-ahead to start talking again, you might want to close your eyes, because this could be a dizzying experience as we pan the room. Okay, this will show you some of the books, and hey, right up here, Marie. Dr. Robert Thayer, our son, one of the diplomas. Not too relevant to the cruise, but I just thought I'd point that out. So here's our chart. Can we see that now? Okay, so now we can see a chart, but of course we can't see anything but my hands. So what the Spanish king did is he gave Magellan 5 ships. The largest was a Trinidad. Magellan is in charge of that. He had one Spanish guy, Serrano, who was in charge of Santiago. In the Santiago, this ship was loyal to Magellan. At least it didn't rebel against him. But the other 3 ships, the San Antonio, Concepcion, and Victoria, were headed by Spanish captains that were just itching for the chance to slit Magellan's throat and take over the cruise. So they were going to rebel. It was just a matter of when. Now, Magellan, of course, was trying to keep the lid on everything, but of course, when they're all against you, you really can't do that. So here's an artist's conception of what the 5 little ships looked like when they were taking off, and here's another idea of what they would look like. This particular model is at Punta Arenas, down there in the Straits of Magellan. Punta Arenas is, I don't know, halfway through or part of the way through the Straits of Magellan. And this down here gives a cutaway view of just how big, or really how small the ship was, with a few people there, there and there, to just show you how small these ships were. Probably, what are we talking about? Probably 100 tons, maybe Trinidad would be larger, San Diego might be a smaller ship. And I go in on my talks, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail here, of what they did to navigate and figure out where they were. They were pretty good with latitude. That's with taking a sighting on the sun or a star above the horizon. And of course, you got to know what the declination is according to time of year, but I won't go into that right now. And talk a little bit about what life was like on the board these ships and what some of their food was like. Now, this is actually I'm from San Diego, and this is from the Cabrillo Museum on Point Loma in San Diego. This is a picture of hardtack. Hardtack is just flour and water. It's cooked. They punch a bunch of holes in the top. It's hard as a rock. You really have to dip it into your wine or coffee, or if you had coffee, dip it in there to soften it up before you can eat it. It's kind of like dipping biscotti into your coffee. That's kind of the idea. But the redeeming feature of this is it would give you a lot of calories, so it gave you a lot of strength when you could eat it, and it would preserve. So it would preserve for years. So they would put this in barrels, and as long as the rats or the weevils didn't get it, they had food. They also used salted pork, salted fish, salted beef, some dried vegetables. That was what they did. Well, what Magellan did the first year is, as he started out, just as he's starting out and he's leaving Spain, he gets a message from one of his relatives in Portugal saying, hey, King Manuel really doesn't want you to go out on this voyage of discovery, and he is getting a big fleet, and he is going to overwhelm your fleet of 5, and he's going to destroy you at sea. So what Magellan did is, instead of sailing the normal way to the coast of Brazil, the good winds are in the middle of the ocean, is he hugged the coast of Africa. Now, the Spanish captains who didn't like him to begin with said that this guy's stupid, he doesn't know where the good winds are. He knew absolutely where the good winds were. He was just avoiding the Portuguese fleet. So he ran into a little bad luck too, 60 days of storm. Finally, he gets over to the Brazilian side. He's hoping that maybe around Rio de Janeiro or Buenos Aires, that'll be the end of South America, that he can turn and get over to the Spice Islands. Doesn't quite work out that way. So here's a chart showing a couple of the trips of Americo Vespucci. The information on him is a little less than totally accurate, but this shows one of his voyages down the coast of Brazil, which was very true. It shows him going down to Rio de la Plata, which is Buenos Aires. I don't think he got down that far, probably somewhere on the Brazilian coast here. So after, say, probably Rio de Janeiro, Magellan is going where no man has gone before. He goes down, and he gets down to Rio de la Plata, or Buenos Aires, and of course, if you've ever been to Rio de la Plata, you know, in addition to the river of silver, and it really does look like silver at night, or in the evening as the sun goes down, that it looks like a passageway to the Pacific. So, of course, he spent a lot of time sailing up the Rio de la Plata. Eventually, of course, it gets narrower, it gets shallower. He realizes this is a river, it's not a passageway to the Pacific. So he goes down the coast of Argentina, down here to really the southern part of Patagonia, and decides that he's got to winter because the weather is just getting horrible, down here at a place called Port Julian. Well, the three Spanish captains hate him. They want to slit his throat. They're cold. They're hungry. Nothing's worked out right. They mutiny. So Cartagena, Mendoza, and Quesada, it's 3 against 1. Serrano is kind of sitting this one out as a neutral, but he later supported Magellan. But Magellan, very cleverly, and it's a long story which I will go into in a normal talk, actually outsmarts these 3 and gets them and then punishes them severely. He has 2 of them drawn and quartered. That means they pull their arms and legs off. He has 2 of noble birth marooned on an island. Pretty severe punishment. A lot of people didn't want to mess with him after that. The next sailing season, which is probably like December or so, the weather gets better, and he sends his probably his fastest and most navigable ship, San Diego, down south to sort of scout out the way for the rest of the ships. But it's caught in a storm driven ashore with the breakers, and it's crushed and lost. Only 2 of the guys are able to get back because they've got to cross a river that's 2 miles wide, and they make raft with the only wood that they've got, and it's enough for 2 guys. They get across and they go back to Port Julian, and then the other guys are saved. It's a pretty thrilling story. I'm not going to go into all the details here. And finally, when he gets his remaining 4 ships going, he comes down here to this point. He finds a very promising inlet, and he's a pretty smart guy. He realizes when he sees a number of whale skeletons right out here at the point that, well, gee, probably the whales are coming through, or possibly the whales are coming through from the Pacific, so maybe this is a passage to the Pacific. And sure enough, 390 miles later, he comes into the Pacific. This line down here is just showing later the path of Sir Francis Drake. He was the first one to go around on the outside, which is why it's known as Drake's Passage. This is some of the beautiful scenery inside the Straits of Magellan. And finally, to summarize Magellan, he started out with 5 ships, 250 men. At the end, it was 1 ship and 18 that had gone around the world. Went 60,000 miles, or about 4 times the distance of Columbus. First navigation of the world, he discovered, of course, the Straits of Magellan, which was the gateway to the Pacific. And the spices, because they did reach the Spice Islands, Victoria brought back this number of spices that it brought back, paid for the entire expedition. That's in a dollars and cents kind of evaluation, of course. That paid for the cost of the 5 ships, and not for the 230 men that were lost. Elcano, he was one of the mutineers, but Magellan had sort of pardoned him. He actually ended up as the captain when he came back with the only ship. Then the King of Spain pardoned him for the mutiny. And that's pretty much the story of Magellan, so thank you for your attention.